Yep.
Awesome. Okay, I'm Rowan Cockett, and I am here with Steve, and we're both the founders of CurveNote, and we're also working on MyST Markdown, which is an executable books project. And today in the webinar, we're going to be talking about using MyST Markdown in JupyterLab, and we'll show a little bit of the other types of things that MyST can do, but that'll really be the focus today. Okay, I want to take a step back and talk about science communication today. And this sort of PDF of a table on its side on a phone is sort of emblematic of the standard of science communication today. And really, it just can be so much better. We should be able to hover over figures and see the references and be able to jump to things. And we should be able to use the superpowers that tools like Jupyter gives us to inject computation into our scientific communication and scientific publishing outputs. And so this is really the thing that motivates me in working on MyST Markdown and really trying to imagine a better future for science communication. And so thinking about that future, what if all of science was much more contextual so that you could click on a reference, click on a footnote, be able to see videos, contextual information, be able to bring up interactive figures directly, maybe from someone else's paper even. And what if everything was computational so that you could, at a click of a button, be able to bring your Jupyter notebooks and show those outputs directly in line, be able to change figures and change things and run scientific simulations as you're going and reading the paper. And then the piece that I want to talk a lot about today is how we bring this into the sort of the creative workflow. And so bringing that writing experience directly into the tools that we're already using. And so, for example, in JupyterLab, being able to bring inline computation and variables directly into the Markdown that you're using. So this example is showing ipywidgets directly inside of Markdown text in MyST Markdown, and being able to show sparklines and widgets and all sorts of things like that. And so all of that is the type of thing that I'm going to show today. And we're not giving up those PDFs that we still need for scientific publishing. So you can export to all sorts of templates with MyST Markdown. There's about 400 or so journal templates available in MyST so that you can choose your journal export. And I'll show that a little bit at the end of the webinar today, but we do have a previous webinar recorded that you can go into that in quite a bit of detail. And then the other piece that we're actively working on is actually being able to share these as both as websites and blogs, as you might with a Jupyter book or a static website, for example, as well as actual sharing these as journals where you can have that persisted over time. And so this is the vision behind MyST Markdown. So it's a community-driven tools for technical communication. It's both this markup language, it's a specification for the actual underlying data structures, and it's an ecosystem of tools that work together across the various places that you're working in so that you can write and show this content easily. And the people behind MyST and Jupyter Book, which some of you may have also heard of, is the Executable Books project. And this is a project that was funded by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation over the past couple of years. And it really extends Jupyter's approach to open standards and applying that towards these authoring and reading and publishing experiences that really put computational narratives at the center of that experience. And Executable Books is the steward behind both Jupyter Book and MyST, and CurveNote, which is the company that I work for, is one of the supporting partners of this project. Okay, so that was a bit of a background on both our our motivations and sort of vision behind the MyST Markdown project. And now I'm going to sort of just jump into demo mode. And Steve will keep me on track with asking questions if I'm going too fast and monitoring the chat as well. Okay, so the sort of agenda that we're going to go through today is a quick setup of the open source tools. I'm mostly going to be just pointing to the documentation and showing you where to get started. And then we're going to do all of the rest of the webinar in JupyterLab to show some MyST Markdown basics, some of that inline interactivity that I was showing, and ways to build websites and PDFs and actually share that content out onto the internet. Okay, all right, so I'll start on mystmd.org. So this is the MyST Markdown landing page. And if you go up to guide and go into MyST in Jupyter, this is the sort of landing page for the tutorial. And then this is the jumping off point for actually getting started with the content. And so if you're following along, the way to enable this extension is pip install JupyterLab MyST. And that is at version 2 right now. And that works best with JupyterLab 4. And some of the features degrade as you get backwards in previous JupyterLab versions. And then the other content that we'll be using today is this repository JupyterLab MyST Quick Start. And if you are want to follow along directly on Binder, you can click this. And I did test this right before the call, and this should be able to start relatively quickly, hopefully. Awesome. Okay, so it has actually figured out the image. So if folks do want to follow along on Binder, that should be able to start. I am going to close that and now move over into JupyterLab. Awesome. And so the first, this is sort of a series of 5 notebooks that we'll be walking through today that just give a few of the features that are possible in working with MyST Markdown inside of JupyterLab. And the first thing you'll notice about this is that there's a whole different frontmatter block. And if you double click on this, this is actually YAML. And so we're actually structuring the information about authors and affiliations and things like ORCID IDs and dates as structured data, and then showing that in a much richer way so that you don't have to have divs and spans to actually bring your content and show it. And then we can use that downstream in publishing workflows. And so if you've installed JupyterLab MyST, you can verify this on the command line. You can also see the, over in the extensions panel, you should be able to see the JupyterLab MyST plugin over here, and you can enable or disable that at will, and then that will take over the different cells in rendering your notebook. And the other thing that you might notice is in this tutorial, we're actually using MyST Markdown. And so that's doing things like bringing callouts and admonitions directly in there. It has new nice things for like copying code cells and snippets. It also allows you to hover over things like GitHub issues and see previews and all sorts of other things. And so that is what I'd like to go through next.
And Rowan, just one question. You're running JupyterLab 4, which is where that extensions playground sort of appears. And the extension is only available in JupyterLab 4 now. So if you're installing JupyterLab MyST 2, that needs to be with JupyterLab 4. Is that right?
It does work with JupyterLab 3.6 and above. There are some caveats to that. Some of the features are a bit degraded in there with regards to the inline interactivity mostly.
Okay.
So definitely thinking about upgrading to JupyterLab 4 if you can. There's all sorts of nice things as well in JupyterLab 4.
Cool.
Any other questions before we start diving into a little bit of showing some MyST Markdown? Awesome. Maybe like the first thing I'll do is just show you this cell, for example. And this is actually just showing a few cards, bringing those in, having a link that's directly to a notebook. And when I shift enter to execute that cell, this is now showing that in a much richer rendered way. And it also hooks into JupyterLab's link system so that I click on that, and now that opens my next notebook. Awesome. Okay, so the first parts that I'll go through is really just showing that editing of Markdown cells. This is exactly the same as any other time that you're using Jupyter and Markdown, is you double click on the cell and then you can edit it. And the difference with MyST Markdown is this colon fence syntax. You can put these colon fences around content, and then there's these directives that have a name, and you can look in the documentation for all sorts of different types of things that you can do. But for example, you can have tips and notes that actually show admonitions or callouts directly in your documents, and you can add different classes to them to give them like drop downs, for example. And so one of the things that we could do is actually change this into a note. So if we just come over here and just change that into a note, then that'll change the color from green to blue. It'll also change the icon over here. We could also remove this class, for example, and then it'll stay, it'll be open by default. Awesome. So one of the, that's an example of using these admonitions directly in Markdown cells. And then it works with all sorts of other, the types of things that you might expect from a scientific authoring tool, is being able to add figures, for example. And so figures are a figure directive with the first argument of that directive being the actual source of the image source. And then you can give it a name like you might in LaTeX for labeling a figure. And then a caption is just the contents of that directive. And then it has some other options on there that you can look up in the documentation for alignment and width, for example. And then when our beach picture is a random picture from Unsplash, and that is maybe the top of a beach picture. So one of the main types of things that I was showing right at the start of this webinar is being able to hover over content and being able to see those figures, for example. And so to do that, you can create a Markdown link to an internal link. So that's a hash, and then just give it the ID that you've used or the name that you've used above. And so here, we're just making sure that this matches the other link down here. And then when we actually execute or render these cells, we can hover over that figure and directly see those pieces in line. And you'll also notice that these are automatically numbered, and that goes for the figure captions as well. So here we have a figure caption over here. And then if we, for example, drag this, I don't have enough screen real estate. If I drag this above, now you'll see that this fruit figure is figure 1, the beach figure is figure 2, and these have renumbered directly in the document as soon as I've moved those around. So we can change that again, figure 1, figure 2. And so that's all that numbering just happens automatically. And there is a lot of other documentation that you can look to quickly look that up. This is also the case for equations. And so just like you would in JupyterLab, you can use the dollar syntax. There's also a math directive, which gives you a lot of the other types of things that you might want to be able to do. And the way to label LaTeX equations is just label it like you would in LaTeX, and then you can grab that reference here. And so we are, again, doing exactly the same thing. We're just creating a Markdown link to that internal document that has that label, and that will bring it up, and we can see those figures the equations can be hovered, and we can see that again. And just like the equation numbering, we can drag things around, figure one or equation one, equation two, and again, these have been auto numbered, and that is all up to date.
Cool. And then on one of those equations, Ron, you've got actual sort of alt text going on in the link, so that allows you to customize what section displayed.
Yeah, so the default text for equations is the brackets around a number, and if you want to override that, you can change that to anything. So you could just say equation, and then there's a couple things that allow you to bring the number in. It's just %s, and then that just gets replaced with the actual number. And so I could put that anywhere. I could make that bold, for example, and then that is a bold number one next to equation. And so that's a quick way to, if you want to have a cross-reference that has custom text in it.
Very cool.
Awesome. So some of the other types of things that you might see here are just links over to Wikipedia articles. And because this is structured information, we can actually pull that into our document. And so if we hover over this, this actually gives us a Wikipedia preview of that content. And so that is pretty easy to do, but it can also be even easier by having this shorthand wiki link syntax. And so if we open this up, we can see that this is a link to a wiki article. And if we hover over that, that is a link over to a Wikipedia article about geophysics, but we could change that by just having some other link, and then we can pull in that information as well. And there's a couple other types of things that you could link to, for example, GitHub issues as well. So here we just have a link to a GitHub issue, and we can hover over that, and that shows some information about that issue. And we can also have content directly as code as well. And so this, for example, if we open this up, we can maybe select a different line, so 130 to 134. We can copy the permalink to this, come back into here, and we can paste that in and hit enter, and 130 to 134 is highlighted. And so that now just sort of brings that together. And so you can use your like tutorials and types of things to be able to showcase links out to other structured platforms like Wikipedia or GitHub. Awesome. And there's a couple other types of things that you can link to, and there is some more documentation on that over there. I'm just going to sort of rapid fire go through a couple of the other types of things that you can do with MyST. One of the cool things that I think is being able to edit task lists. And so Jupyter allows you, or Jupyter, the standard Markdown renderer, allows you to show task lists, but it doesn't allow you to actually edit them. And so here I can edit that task list. We can see that that has updated the Markdown cell, and this allows for example, a student to quickly go through, check things off as they're going, and they don't have to come in here and edit the markdown and make that go. And so that's some of the other nice type of things that you can have coming up. Just a quick highlight of some of the other types of features here. You can add mermaid diagrams. You can have proofs with hover references, for example, all sorts of different proofs and theorems and lemmas and criterion that you can add to your document. You can also have exercises. So this is, for example, an exercise that we could add a drop down to and just hide the solution. And here, if you hover over exercise 1, that shows you that exercise. And so again, all sorts of rich cross-linking between the different types of content that's out there. Things like synced tabs, work, grids, content, those cards that I was showing before as well. And so lots of rich authoring experiences that you can add to make your Markdown notebooks look really great. Okay, maybe I'll pause there for a second if anyone has any questions on the Markdown side, and otherwise I'm going to move on to some of the inline interactivity.
Feel free to unmute quickly if you've got a question, or otherwise drop it in the chat.
Okay. So one of the types of things that I was showing in those videos right at the start of the webinar was being able to add inline variables directly into your Markdown content. And the way that, or the syntax to use for this in MyST is a role syntax. And so that's these two, this bracket, which defines the role, and then this is the content that you execute. And then when you actually do Shift Enter on that cell, that will execute the results and show that directly in line. And so, for example, here, if we want to be able to show an array directly in line, we can be able to execute that. We can show that in here. We can also do other types of things on that. So for example, we could take the sum of that, and that will show up as the sum. And then we could also take the max, and we can bring all of those variables directly in line. And so this is really allowing you to start mixing in that computational content directly into your narrative, not just interspersing it cell by cell. And this also works with things like ipywidgets. And so this allows you, for example, in this, to be able to put some text labels, some other sorts of sliders and labels here directly into your content. And these could even be in those admonitions or in grids. And that allows you to bring those directly in line. And so this really opens up a lot of different possibilities for communicating your science or tutorials. There's other types of things that you could do. Actually have sparklines, for example. And so here we have an example of a sparkline that's coming directly from a matplotlib figure. And all we've done to put that in is we've just evaluated that small figure that's directly in line. And so that comes in nicely, and then we can annotate those and start to bring all sorts of stuff into our documents. The other types of things that you could bring in line, which again, that is anything. The rendering might not be perfect at this stage, but if you do have some pieces that you want to get in there, we will definitely help you out. So one of the things that, for example, is being able to evaluate symbolic expressions using SymPy. And so this is an example where we are expanding a polynomial, but we're not doing it by hand or with sort of custom writing out the LaTeX. We're using SymPy to expand that polynomial and then evaluate it and then show that math directly in line. And what's nice about that is then we can change this and then we can see the result directly in line, and we could maybe square that and cube the x, and then we get all sorts of that, and we don't have to trace these things all the way through, and that content can flow all the way through even to PDF exports at this stage. So other types of things, anything that you can do with IPython display, for example, images or YouTube videos. You can even have content from that can be scripts. These will only be shown in the interactive web outputs, but you can do things like hover and change the inner text of an element. And so lots to play with there. I think especially for things like these symbolic expressions and sparklines really can change some of the ways that we communicate and bring that computation directly in line into your documents.
Absolutely. Because in this, like they say, this allows you to take control of the narrative flow completely. So you can now concentrate on having larger lumps of narrative text without putting it spaced, without having to think about this linear splitting of narrative versus the code cells that you need.
Yeah.
And combine that with hiding the code as well, and you can do a lot and have something which looks very document based. There's a quick question as well from James, which is just about, I think, on that value interpolation. And is there any highlighting or indication that the value is computed instead of like hand typed once the cells rendered, I guess?
We don't have that at the moment. We have been playing with that a little bit in the renderer for the site output at this stage, where you can, for example, hover over and possibly see the expression directly in line. And so that could be something like we have admonitions. We don't have abbreviations hooked up in this example, but we do over here. Like you could have little help text potentially that shows you that expression. I'm not sure. So lots to figure out. And if you do have ideas on that, it would be good to hear some opinions.
Another question Ivan's asking, well, basically, can eval contain multiple expressions? The motivation being there is like allowing you to do sort of things like set a deterministic value. So that if you're doing an NP, if you have a look in the chat, if you're doing NP random, but you don't want the cell to change every time. So I think Ivan's meaning, can you freeze that and set a like deterministic seed actually in the markdown cell?
I think for that you would want to. So the goal of these is these really small expressions, and I think it's user beware if you're starting to change other state in your notebook. These should probably be reading state and showing variable outputs and not necessarily setting content. And if you are doing that, I would suggest you put your random seed setter up above in a code cell and then execute the markdown cell.
Yeah, but you're also directly executing a function there that's returning a value, sort of expand polynomial, no?
Yeah.
So you can always wrap up multiple expressions in a function, yes?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, so.
Yeah, so lots that you can do in here. I'm sure if you do too much, it'll start to fray around the edges, I'm sure. But this does allow you to do quite a bit of content, and it's certainly nice to be able to change the cell and not have to write out your LaTeX expression, for example, every time.
Cool.
Any other questions about inline interactivity? Okay. I just have a couple other types of things that I want to talk about in the MyST frontmatter side. There's sort of two different types of things that you can add to a frontmatter block beyond the sort of title, subtitle, authors, affiliations, date, all of that sort of information, which is all documented in MyST Markdown. They are math macros and abbreviations. And so the math macros are types of things that you might be familiar with from if you're using LaTeX, for example, to be able to define a custom function and then be able to have that sort of expanded content with potentially arguments directly in there as well. And this is the way that MyST allows you to define these math expressions, and that allows them to be shared across multiple documents as well. And so here we're literally just using those, and you can see over here that if we maybe change, I don't know, data, we'll just make it, oh no, is it not going to work? Oh no, it did work. Okay, good. It's this one. And so for example, you can change the macro and then that updates as you're going through. And so you're able to sort of centralize that complex LaTeX code and make it available as data as well. The other types of things that you can pull into frontmatter are content for abbreviations. So here we have two abbreviations listed, and what that allows you to do is anytime you're writing, you can just hover over that content now, and you can start to see those acronyms defined. And this is something that's really helpful for people who are not familiar with a scientific field to be able to actually just hover over something and know HR isn't human resources, it's heart rate in this context.
Cool. In your frontmatter block, people are just noticing that there are slashes on dpred look weird. Have you noticed that before? It's almost like they're italic or something.
I don't know what is going on with the there is nothing special about the slash. There is something special about the JupyterLab rendering of these slashes. And I have noticed that. I haven't dug into that. And it's super strange that they all seem to be at different angles.
What type of cell is that as well? You're typing the markdown, that's a markdown cell.
Yes, this can either be a markdown cell or a raw cell, I believe.
Okay. Yeah.
And to actually allow this to be a markdown cell, you just start it with, a frontmatter block. You start it with these 3 dashes. And that's something that you can do anywhere, but if it's not the first cell in your document, then it'll just turn into this YAML block. And the slashes are now correct. So yeah, if we have that as our first markdown cell, you can see that it is it's rendered as a MyST Markdown cell.
Oh, cool. Yeah, people have worked out it's probably the underscores causing italics.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. Well done to the audience.
Okay, so one last thing that I'm going to quickly show, and I'm going to just show it. So this is now not a Jupyter Notebook. It's just a plain Markdown cell, and we can right click on this and say open with Markdown preview, and then bring that over to the to the side, for example, and then we can actually just start to edit this, hit save, and then see the edits in real time as you're working through that. And so this is actually quite a nice authoring experience to be able to have your markdown on one side and then be able to see that directly on the other side. There is one note, is that the default setting in Jupyter is to actually strip the front matter off. And so that's something that you will need to go into the settings, search for front matter, and just check that, and then re-render this, and then the front matter will start to show up as well. And so this is something that actually allows you to create nice looking scientific papers, for example. So over here, we're this is an example of a paper that I wrote that has all sorts of cross-references to content. There's even more links over into Jupyter Notebooks as well. And this allows you to, again, just hover over those, see all of that content, have that nice, rich, rendered experience over on the right-hand side, and then be able to edit that right away. And at the start of this, I also told you that we could make PDFs. So I just want to show that quickly. So you can be able to, or you can build these markdown files. So if we say build paper.md and we give the PDF flag, what that is looking to is the exports field. And so this is format PDF. We can, well, maybe we can, no, we'll just build it. So if we hit build there, we can choose the template. Right now, I'm going to use the preprint template. And so that's a nice looking LaTeX template that does take about 17 seconds to actually build on my machine.
It's worth the wait.
It's worth the wait because
and this is using, you're using the MyST CLI tool.
Yes.
Installed independently from JupyterLab MyST.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there are two things to install. Right now that's available through NPM, but it'll be coming to PyPI in the next few months as well. And this allows you all sorts of things, like, for example, creating websites of this content. So we can just say MyST start, and that will give us a website of the content. And we can open that up, see this over here. Oh my gosh. Sorry. There we go. We can see all of our content and the types of things that we were working on before. Well, we can see this as a website that we can actually share at the end of the day. And so some of that inline interactivity, for example, all of that content that we had is coming directly through. And the, sorry, I can't see my terminal. There we go. We're able to build that paper, and we can also then open it at the end of the day. And then this is a preprint that you can get out to different places, and it allows you to actually showcase your work in sort of the traditional PDF format as well.
Cool.
Awesome.
So, I mean, that's really exciting. I mean, because we've gone through all those features, and what always strikes me is there's a mix of features in there. MyST has so many elements, like the interactive elements, that are just really good for putting like tutorial material together, software documentations, or interactive websites that can, you know, that combine all sort of scientific and technical material. But then on this side, what you're just showing with the Markdown file is we're getting to the point where we can make JupyterLab an authoring environment. So you can bring Markdown-based editing and writing of a manuscript right in beside the notebooks that you use to screen your data, generate your figures, etc. And that's the sort of endpoint for us as we keep developing this extension is that the extension enables you to do all your authoring in JupyterLab. And it's almost there. I think there's just a couple of extra things we need to add in that are ongoing work. And that's sort of like the full reference support from the bib file and proper multi-document cross-referencing across the various notebooks.
Yep. Yeah. So that is the types of things that I wanted to go through in the webinar today. And that has sort of gotten us all the way up to creating a website and creating that PDF. There's ways to share that both on CurveNote as a hosting platform, as well as GitHub Pages, and being able to share that interactive content. And I want to just show a quick preview of the type of thing that we're actively working on. And so this is being able to bring all of this content directly and be able to share Jupyter kernels and have those directly in your page. And so this is something that is running directly in your browser, being able to integrate with SciPy, show a matplotlib figure, and execute that in a shareable static website. And this works for all sorts of different things, like your matplotlib figures. You can create these little mini widgets and share them as part of your narrative documentation. And then all of these have a source to the notebook that you can click on and then hit the play button. And this one's using Jupyter Lite, for example. So it takes a second to install things, but then this all starts working directly in line. Fantastic. Okay, cool. I think
a couple more questions.
Say? Yeah, please. Yeah.
Yeah. So Lorena was asking, is it possible to get a LaTeX submission out of this? So can we export to LaTeX rather than PDF?
Yes. I will just show you that. You change this PDF to heck. And that is how you export. You can also do the PDF build at the same time as the tech, and then that'll give you your output bundle with everything that's sort of archive submission ready. So it normalizes all of your paths, gives you a consistent bundle for that LaTeX submission, and should build pretty well.
And there's a couple of templates aimed at archive submissions up there, isn't there? There's a single and a 2-column already up on the, there's a public open repo where all these templates are.
Yes, and yeah, you can also list those by saying, I think list templates list. I think that is, so there's all sorts of different templates that you can bring in there, and to use one of these, you can, so if we just grab the plain LaTeX one, for example, I shouldn't have closed my terminal. We can do that, maybe open a terminal over here and say MyST build PDF again. And so this will, oh, I already had the plain LaTeX installed, but it would have gone out and fetched that template there, and then we can open that again. And this will be, did I not save it? Oh, that's tech. Oh my gosh. PDF. There we go. Cool. Now it's actually fetching the template, pulling it locally, and then that'll actually build that nicely directly there. And then this should look much simpler. And so this is now the standard template for LaTeX, with a plain LaTeX template with the massive margins.
Yeah. Cool. And another question, so what happens to interactive cells or tab viewing, etc., when you render to PDF LaTeX?
Some of interactive cells, so there's a whole lot that you can do inside of there. If it's a static export, like SciPy, for example, gets you a plain LaTeX output, those eval array expressions rendered to text, all of those will get carried through to your PDF or static outputs. We're working right now on converting the interactive widgets, for example, to images, and those then will carry through as an image all the way through. But that piece isn't quite hooked up yet.
I guess also, so there's the interactive. And in terms of what about the other MyST features, a bit like an admonition or a grid or things like that?
Some of those we have support for. Right now, we've focused mostly on the types of things that you would have in a scientific article on the PDF. The admonitions do work. I think the grids don't work at the moment, and the tabs don't work at the moment. And so what that does is it just shows the inside of the content without any styling around it.
Okay. Great. And then on the sort of the other side of that, which is maybe outputs and the things that you display with the Jupyter styles, anything image, text-based, LaTeX-based, and things like that automatically goes through. And then we're actually just actively working on now a process where the MyST CLI will let you snapshot, will execute your notebooks and let you snapshot the outputs so that we have placeholder images for anything that you've done with, for example, ipywidgets or Altair or bokeh, etc. And then that can be used in your static content. Cool. From James, how portable is the HTML render? You mentioned curve note and GitHub as deployment targets, but how portable is it?
You can export to static HTML and take that HTML bundle anywhere. And so that's a self-contained piece of content. There are, I think that's.
Yeah, and that's what's used on GitHub, the pages, but it's not in any way GitHub specific. There's nothing in there.
Yeah. The only thing that's easy right now is that you can say MyST init GitHub pages, I think. And that gives you like a little bit of a CLI to help you create a GitHub action, asking which branch to deploy from and adding that YAML and taking you through some steps to actually create a GitHub page. And then the next time you deploy that, that'll get you a static website.
Yeah, and automatically deploy for each commit to be up to date. Cool. Great. And another question for Rachel. So you showed the export of the paper MD. Do you need to do anything special if you want to export a notebook instead? Or is it just a matter of adding it to the front matter in the notebook? Yeah,
the MyST CLI treats notebooks and Markdown files as peers. And so there really isn't anything special in terms of the rendering. It creates that file directly as well. Yeah.
So the MyST.yaml that's in the quick start isn't actually doing anything at the moment. It's actually, in terms of export, it's the front matter section in each document that you would add the export rules and sort of template to.
Yes,
in order to
correct.
Get them out as PDF.
Yeah. There is right now the JupyterLab plugin is sort of document specific. So when you're opening a document, everything needs to be in that document. MyST does allow you to share front matter. So for example, if I had authors on every single paper, I could move paper and notebooks. I could move this author section up from a single paper into the MyST YAML, and then it would be shared with the potential to override it. And so that is how I would suggest doing it if you're setting up the project. But right now, it doesn't actually show up in the MyST extension right now.
Yeah, but it will. But I think that sort of project level support is what we're working towards, so that it really becomes then very aligned with the CLI. Great. Cool. Well, if you want to wrap up there, Rowan, before I switch off the recording and we can open all the questions.
Open up for more questions. Yeah. So give MyST a try, mystmd.org. There's guides. Every single demo is interactive. And so you can try it right on the site. You can also go to Sandbox and show some of the things that we're trying today. One of the things that CurveNote does is create journals around MyST Markdown sites. And so if you do have a community or a lab group or a journal that you're interested in, please do get in touch with us. Steve and I hang out in the CurveNote Slack. You can ping us over there. And if you do anything with MyST, please ping us on Twitter or Mastodon.